Next, we will explore the major veins from the Anatomy and Physiology 2 lab list, beginning with those of the head and the neck. The right and left external jugular veins drain blood from the tissues that are external to the skull. Meanwhile, the right and left vertebral, as well as the right and left internal jugular veins, will both drain blood from the brain. All three sets of veins drain blood into the subclavian veins, which in turn deliver their blood to the brachiocephalic veins, and then on to the superior vena cava. In the diagram, we see the external jugular veins, the vertebral veins, and the internal jugular veins, which all deliver their blood to the subclavian vein, which is here. The subclavian vein then becomes the brachiocephalic vein, which then delivers its blood to the superior vena cava. Next, we move on to the veins of the upper limbs that drain blood from the upper limbs back towards the heart. Working from the phalanges of the hand, we see that the digital veins will deliver blood from the fingers to the right and left radial and ulnar veins of the forearm, both of which deliver blood to the brachial vein of the arm. We see that the basilic vein also empties into the brachial vein as well. The brachial vein then becomes the axillary vein, and the axillary vein will drain into the subclavian vein. Similarly, we also see that there is a vein called the cephalic vein, which will also drain its blood into the axillary vein as well. The axillary veins become the subclavian vein, and the subclavian veins empty their blood into the superior vena cava. So from the digital veins of the hand, the radial vein runs parallel to the radius bone in the lateral part of the forearm, and the ulnar vein runs parallel to the ulna bone in the medial part of the forearm. The cephalic vein is in close proximity to the radial vein and continues from the lateral forearm all the way up through the lateral arm and to the shoulder. The same is true for the basilic vein, which drains blood from the medial forearm, the medial arm, and proceeds up to the shoulder. The basilic and brachial veins merge to become the axillary vein. Meanwhile, the cephalic vein merges with the axillary vein to become the subclavian vein. And it's then that the subclavian vein, as it approaches the heart, they become the brachiocephalic veins. The abdominal veins, called the superior mesenteric, the inferior mesenteric, and the gastric veins, all drain their blood into a vein system that's referred to as the hepatic portal vein or the hepatic portal system. The hepatic portal system takes blood to the liver to be cleansed in the event that anything toxic has been ingested and needs to be removed from the bloodstream before it reaches the heart. But we also see that the liver functions very heavily in processing nutrients from the digestive system, and so it makes sense that the blood with those absorbed nutrients from those digestive system organs is then shuttled to the liver for processing. After being processed by the liver, the blood leaves the liver through the hepatic vein, and the hepatic vein drains its blood into the inferior vena cava. So in this first abdominal diagram, we see the inferior vena cava, which receives blood from the hepatic veins, which are shown at the top, as well as the renal veins, which drain the blood from the right and the left kidneys. In the second abdominal diagram, we see the superior mesenteric vein, which drains blood from parts of both the large and the small intestine. We also see the inferior mesenteric vein, which drains blood from the large intestine, as well as the gastric vein, which is appropriately named because it drains blood from the stomach. And we also see in the left, well, on the right side of this diagram, but it would be in the left side of the body, we see the splenic vein, which drains blood from the spleen. All of these veins ultimately merge and become the hepatic portal vein, which delivers blood to the liver for processing of nutrients as well as cleansing. So finally, we will examine the veins of the lower limbs, beginning with the digital veins that drain the toes. The digital veins proceed up to the posterior tibial vein, which delivers its blood to the popliteal vein. Similarly, we see the anterior tibial vein, which delivers its blood to the popliteal vein. So the posterior and anterior tibial veins essentially merge to become the popliteal vein. The popliteal vein moving up the lower limb becomes the femoral vein, and then the femoral vein becomes the external iliac vein. A long vein that is found in the superficial medial side of the lower limb, which is called the great saphenous vein, drains its blood into the external iliac vein. The small internal iliac vein, along with the external iliac vein, all proceed to drain their blood into the common iliac vein, which then proceeds to the inferior vena cava. So in this diagram here, we see the anterior tibial vein, which proceeds up to the popliteal vein. The popliteal vein, after moving past the back part of the knee, becomes the femoral vein because it is parallel to the femur. And then the femoral vein drains its blood into the external iliac vein. We also see the small internal iliac vein, which mostly drains blood from the internal part of the pelvis. That merges with the external iliac vein to become the common iliac vein. We also see in this diagram the very long great saphenous vein, which proceeds essentially from the ankle all the way up to the hip joint, and is one of the longest veins in the body as it drains blood from the medial part of the lower limb, so the medial part of the leg as well as the medial part of the thigh. In this final veins diagram, we get a proper look at the digital veins, which drain blood from the toes that proceed up to drain their blood into the posterior tibial vein. The posterior tibial vein merges with the anterior tibial vein to become the popliteal vein. And we also get a little bit of a different perspective on the great saphenous vein on the left side of the diagram there.